Gingerbread Cookies, Christmas classic. Okay, now this recipe had a few fails, but I think you can get a pretty good result if you take a few of my tips I can give you. We're going to weigh out our flour first. Of course, weighing's the best way to get an accurate measure and make sure you're using the right amount. Put your bowl on, zero out your scale. Got a little too much, no biggie. Very handy to store your flour in a canister, and then you can just use a spoon and dip out whatever you need. You don't have to mess with a bag. I'll go ahead and put in our spices and other stuff. Typical with a dough recipe, go ahead and add in all your other dry ingredients, and you'll mix those all together before adding in the other stuff. Go ahead and mix that well with a whisk. I'll help break up any little chunks. Now we're going to get our mixer ready to go. Typical for a dough recipe, we're going to use the paddle attachment. We're going to drop the butter in chunks. Helps it to mix a little more easily, of course. Go ahead and add our brown sugar. We're going to beat those together well till it's really super thoroughly mixed. Here you can see my OXO tool I use for getting orange or lemon zest. And you're going for the colored part on a washed piece of fruit. The color part is the part with the odor and the flavor. We don't want the white because the white part's going to be bitter. And your ingredients are going to mix a little better if you chop up that zest. I didn't do it. I was a little lazy. But it just helps everything mix a little more finely. I didn't feel like it was a fatal flaw though. And while we were getting the zest from the orange, our butter and sugar was still beating. You really can't overbeat that, so you just set it to run and work on other stuff. And now we'll scrape down the bowl and the paddle. This small white spatula works really well for that. It has a corner and a tapered edge, so it's perfect for this sort of thing. It also bends too, and that helps you work with the curves on the paddle attachment and on the bowl. Okay, now we're going to go ahead and add the egg. Now that you've added an egg, you need to mix, but you don't want to get too crazy. You have to watch and follow directions with eggs and with flour that you don't overwork the dough. Especially where there's egg yolk. It seems like with egg white, you can really go to town on it, but when there's egg yolk involved, then they usually want you to stir more slowly and not overwork it. Now we'll add the molasses, and this is the part that's going to make your cookies so yummy, but it also makes the dough really sticky. So this is what's going to make it a fun dough to work with. It's not terrible, but you'll definitely need to be generous with the flour, as you'll see when you roll it out, because it is a pretty sticky dough. It'll quickly stick to the countertop, quickly absorb any flour that you use. Now we'll add the zest. And you want to be on the generous side with that. If in doubt, pack it more tightly and add more, because it's going to be such an important part of the flavoring. Now we'll mix again. And after the addition of the molasses and the zest, you're definitely going to need to scrape down the bowl and the paddle. And make sure you get clear down to the bottom of the bowl. So when you go to dump the dough out, you aren't finding chunks of unmixed ingredients. We'll go ahead and run the mixer again. Make sure we get it good. Now we can begin spooning in the flour mixture, giving it a chance to start incorporate as we keep spooning in more, and that will help it to mix more evenly than if you just throw it in. Again, at this point now you've got flour and you've got an egg, so you don't want to just go completely crazy on mixing it in order to get it properly and thoroughly mixed. So I just keep spooning that in there, let it turn a couple of times, and then add some more. I'll scrape down the bowl again and the paddle attachment, and you can see it's really starting to pull together now into a dough. Pretty sticky and pretty gooey though. Like I said, that's normal. It's just part of it. We'll go ahead and run that mixer one more time, just briefly. Now we can go ahead and remove the paddle attachment and scrape it down and get that out of the way. Here you can see this cookie sheet that I've lined with parchment paper. We'll go ahead and scrape the dough out on that. And see, if you tried to roll it right now, it would just be a mess. You couldn't even hardly work with it. And that's why we'll take the time to lay it out there, wrap it up so it doesn't dry out, and we'll go ahead and get it chilled. You can even freeze it for a while if you need to before you're ready to use it. We'll go ahead and flatten it out. It'll make it easier to wrap it well and to, then after it's chilled, section out a chunk and we'll work with it. I think it was 1/4 or 1/3 at a time so that we're not warming the dough too much as we cut it out. The more the dough warms and the butter in the dough melts, the stickier the dough becomes and the more difficult it can be to work with. It can be more pliable, but it also gets a lot more sticky. And this is such a sticky dough anyway. We'll go ahead and tidy up the edges a bit. And now we'll wrap it up with saran wrap and get this dough chilled. Now our dough is chilled and ready to roll. So we're gonna unwrap it and cut out a section. It is quite stiff when it's chilled, so you'll have to work with it just a little bit to warm it up enough for it to be pliable and roll decently. You can kind of see here I just used a pizza cutter to cut out a section. And yeah, I did work with it in quarters. I'm taking 1/4 of it here. Now I'll wrap the rest back up and stick it in the fridge. We'll go ahead and flour our surface, and you will definitely need to keep the rolling pin floured well also as you work. Usually that's not a real concern with pie crust, but with this dough, again, it's very sticky. So you're going to want to roll as little as you have to, and you're going to need to keep everything well floured. I had to kind of roll it and fold it to get it to start loosening up so I could actually roll it out. And it is pretty crumbly when it is chilled as well. And again, you just got to be patient with it. It will become more pliable. You just keep working it, and all of a sudden it will loosen up and you'll be able to start cutting out cookies. But at first it's going to want to separate, it's going to crumble, and it's going to be pretty stiff. That's quite common. Nothing wrong with that. If you just try to leave it out at room temperature though, it's going to be too warm and too wet to work with. So it's better if you just keep working with it and just get it softened up, working it with your hands. Now it's still being pretty difficult, but already we've got it thin enough. We can go ahead and start cutting out some cookies. As soon as you've got a section where you can go ahead and cut out a cookie, go for it. Because like I said, as this dough warms, it's going to get really, really sticky. We'll go ahead and flatten it out some more, and you can just work those gaps together and then smooth it out with a rolling pin and go ahead and cut a cookie. You can see there how much that dough is already sticking to the countertop. If the cookies didn't taste so good and they weren't such a Christmas tradition, it'd almost be too much of a pain in the rear to do. But it is fun once they're done and you can start icing them. And they are tasty cookies. They have a very good, very strong flavor. I love them. Okay, now you can use a small spatula to scoop up these cookies. I need to get a metal one. In fact, I had a metal one, but I just forgot I had it. You can see how much dough and how much of the molasses coloring is still stuck to the countertop there. And again, that's why you'll want to be generous with the flour. Once again, remember to keep reflouring your surface and your rolling pin. Get some flour on your hands and reflour that rolling pin. And like I've said before, that flour, that will reabsorb with the baking. It's not a big deal. But you can see how sticky and crumbly that dough is. It's a very dense cookie. And again, that flour you see on the top there, that's going to be absorbed. It's not a problem. You can see now that as the dough warms with the rolling, it becomes more difficult to pick up these cookies without them losing their shape. So again, that's why you have to keep chilling the dough, and it's just a tricky dough to work with, and that's just all there is to it. But it does hold its shape, especially when you chill the cookies again before baking. It will hold its shape, and it does have a very good flavor. Very good, strong flavor and smell. And these are the cookies I was cutting out, just rolling 1/4 of the dough. So by the time you finish up with the entire amount of dough, you have quite a few gingerbread cookies. It's a pretty decent sized recipe. It will give you a lot to work with through the holidays, and great for having good cookies on hand when people come over for Christmas. And now we'll go chill the cookies before baking them. Again, to help them hold their shape. And there you can see what they look like when they're done. Now you want to only bake these for 10 minutes. I baked mine longer because it said until firm to the touch, and they ended up being much firmer than I wanted them to be. Much firmer. So do not heed the recipe and bake till firm to the touch. Just check your oven temperature, bake for 10 minutes, and call it good. You'll be a lot happier with the texture of how your cookie turns out.